Here I'm going to give you a short introduction to Dale Jamieson's method and moral theory. He begins by saying that he's going to write about questions about moral theory rather than questions in moral theory. What does he mean by that? He means that he wants to think about how moral theories are constructed. Why do we have moral theories? Is there any point in moral theories, or are they pointless? He's not so interested in questions in moral theory, so not so interested in which theory you should choose, how to apply it. Should you choose Kant or Bentham, for example? Not so interested in that. He is interested in what he calls the dominant conception that has been presupposed or endorsed by theorists of many different stripes. Well, by this, the traditional approach to moral theories, by people like Thomas Aquinas, natural law, you've got Hobbes, egoism, social contract theory, Bentham, utilitarianism, and so on. These are all theorists who have, and the idea there is you choose your theory and you decide how to apply it. This is what he calls the dominant conception of ethics. Now this is challenged by people called anti-theorists. Anti-theorists have, as he says, challenges to the dominant conception have become increasingly prominent. Well, anti-theorists include people like Elizabeth Anscombe, famous virtue ethicist, and Alistair McIntyre, also virtue ethics. It's worth, if you read through the text, you'll see plenty written on them there. And likewise Bernard Williams, whose famous example of Jim and the Indians we've seen already, which he uses to illustrate his points. Susan Wolfe talks about moral saints. She thinks the person who follows ethical theories isn't necessarily someone we'd find a very interesting person. Michael Stocker talks about the schizophrenia of ethical theory, particularly that where we're sort of divided between rational duty on the one hand and emotion on the other hand. Which way do we go? Now Sartre, of course, is a well-known anti-theorist. We've seen plenty of Sartre, in particular the student example. And lastly, Carol Gilligan, a feminist philosopher, thinks that ethical theories have been created by men and for men. They don't necessarily relate to women. Women don't necessarily relate to ethical theories in the classical way of the dominant conception. So these are anti-theorists. He goes on to talk about how moral theories are derivative of moral theorizing. By that he means that actually moral theories don't come first. We actually create theories by theorizing in real practice. We, in day-to-day life, in jobs, in college, we have to make decisions all the time. We have to make them fast, and we often use little snippets of theory. We piece them all together, and then we have to make a decision. And it's that theorizing that done by ordinary people like you and me that comes first. Moral theories don't come first. We create ethical theories. Moral theories don't actually help us to solve problems. He goes on in the article to talk about two approaches in theory construction: foundationalism and coherentism. This is a technical part of the text, really. Foundationalism, very simply, is the idea that we begin with a foundation, and that's how we justify our theory. We start with something that some sort of self-evident truth, and then we build a theory from that. Usually the foundation is based on intuition or something. In philosophy of science, where these ideas are drawn from, usually the foundation would be sense experience or experiment, really. But obviously in ethics that doesn't work so well. So we tend to rely on some sort of intuition, which of course is controversial. Coherentism is a slightly different approach here. We say that our theories are justified as long as they fit together with other beliefs that we have. If all of your beliefs fit together in one coherent whole, then your beliefs are justified. A slightly different approach. Now, Jamieson argues that both foundationalism and coherentism have their problems. Coherentism has a problem because it could be that all your beliefs are a bit dodgy, and even if they fit together, that doesn't necessarily mean they're justified. With foundationalism, on the other hand, how can you be sure that the foundations are justified? Are they just self-evident? Is intuition reliable? Well, maybe not. So we've got a problem there. Lastly, he says that different techniques for eliciting and assessing moral intuitions have been employed. One of the most common is the use of examples. examples are often used in ethics. We use literary examples, films and books. We use ostensive examples where we actually use something from real life. We use hypothetical examples. Kant does this. What about the murder at the door, for example? That's a hypothetical example. And finally, we use imaginary examples which are totally made up. Now, you might talk about Judith Jarvis Thompson and the violinist example in abortion debates, but examples which just could not happen. Now, Jamieson is very suspicious of imaginary examples in particular. He thinks, these are ways of testing out our intuitions on things, but he thinks that generally we can often be misled by these examples. People can guide us towards intuitions that they want us to have by the way that they construct the example. So we have to be very careful, particularly of imaginary examples. He thinks hypothetical examples may be a bit better, but you could argue that hypothetical examples also have their issues, and we need to be careful of them. So those, in a nutshell, are the key themes of the Dale Jamieson article.